Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is KarQ and welcome to another segment of the Predator Training Room. Custom crosshairs in Overwatch are a great way to complement the aim style for every hero. At the end of the day, it is all personal preference, but here are my personal crosshairs that can help you get started. We're going to start in alphabetical order because that's how it's organized in the crosshair list. So it starts off with a general crosshair that applies to every hero unless I specifically go into it and change it myself. So here's my overarching default crosshairs. The type is the regular crosshair, accuracy off, I like the green color, thickness at 1, crosshair length at 6, center gap at 7, 100% opacity, outline opacity at 50, dot is irrelevant because the opacity is 0 and that's what I use for more than half the roster. Now if we start off with the first hero on the list, Ahna, I actually use a slightly different one from the default one. The crosshair length is a little bit longer and the outline opacity is a little bit higher. The reason for this is because I don't need to headshot as Ahna, so the longer crosshairs help keep my eye level and reference levels correct when I'm aiming at targets from a distance. Next up is Ashen. I use an even longer crosshair length. The reason for this is because when you scope in as Ashe, for me personally, I feel like the clutter around the scope in, like all this little colorful stuff, kind of throws me off when I'm in the middle of a hectic team fight. So the longer the crosshair, the easier it is for me to not lose track of where the center of my screen is. And that's why I use it. This works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. For Bastion, I keep it on default. Same with Brigitte, not much to say about that. Now for Diva, I use a circle type with a small dot in the center. The reason for the circle is because her shotguns have the big spread, so the circle kind of keeps it encompassed in that. And the small dot helps for when I get demeched into Baby Diva, so I have a little center of reference for when I'm shooting with my little gun. For Doomfist, I use a circle as well because of the spread of his pellets. And for Genji, I use the default crosshairs, but I know some Genji players use a circle and crosshair and customize it, so there are about 3 lines there. And that represents the right click or the secondary fire of his shurikens. It helps for newer Genji players to kind of get a feel for the distance of how the shurikens spread, but for more advanced Genji players, once you become a bit proficient at them, most of them switch back to a crosshair or dot. For Hanzo, I use the circle and crosshair and show accuracy option on. These are the settings for the rest of the crosshair and the little dot in the center to help me keep the center of reference. The show accuracy option on for me personally helps me determine how charged my bow is and can determine how high or how low I want to aim my projectile. However, some players still prefer the default Hanzo crosshair because it has a long horizontal line to keep their shots in the correct horizontal plane. But at the end of the day, again, personal preference, I like the circle and crosshair. Now for Junkrat, I use the default crosshair and not the one I showed at the beginning of this video. That was to kind of poke fun at the crazy crosshair customizations you can make. Now for Lucio, McCree, and Mei, I use the standard crosshair like I mentioned earlier in this video. And for Mercy, I use a crosshair that has a lower opacity. Now the reason for this is because I don't really need to aim too much as Mercy, so it's very faded and washed out with the opacity, and it helps me keep an eye on what's going on in the battlefield, so there's no obstruction in my view. For Mora, I use the standard crosshair, and for Arisa, I use a circle crosshair with this kind of center gap in order to kind of contain the random spread of Arisa's bullets. So as long as someone's in that crosshair, potentially a bullet will hit them. Now for Pharah, I use a circle crosshair with a center gap of 20 in order to encompass the size of her rocket. And for Reaper, I use a circle crosshair as well with a center gap of 41. This is to kind of encompass all of his shotgun pellets. Obviously, his shotguns do spread a lot more than what's indicated on the crosshair, but the circle kind of gives me a reference on how close I want to be. For Reinhardt, I use the standard crosshair. For Roadhog, I use a circle with a little dot in the center. The circle kind of encompasses the pellets again for the shotgun, but the dot is there to help reference the center when I go for the hooks. Now for Soldier, I use the circle crosshair, but my show accuracy option is on. What this does is keep the crosshair as a dot, and it spreads into a circle the moment the bullets start spreading. I believe Soldier shoots 8 bullets before the spread starts kicking in, so this accuracy tab helps keep track of that to let me know when I've held the button for too long or to kind of switch it back to burst firing to keep the accuracy up. For Sombra, I use default. Now for Symetra, I use the circle crosshair as well with the accuracy option on again, and what the accuracy option does for Symetra, when I use her secondary fire, it showcases how long it takes for me to charge my secondary fire before it's at maximum damage. So when you see the circle from the center spread to the outer ring, that's when you can let go. For Torb and Tracer, I use the standard crosshair, and for Widowmaker, I use the standard crosshair with a slightly smaller crosshair length. I do this because since I'm sniping from a super long distance, I want less on the screen so it doesn't obstruct the tiny pixels of the enemies from the long distance. For Winston, I use the standard crosshair. His isn't as big of a deal simply because his Tesla cannon spreads the targets near him. And for Hammond, I use a circle with the accuracy option on as well to help determine when the bullet spread starts kicking in, like we explained earlier in the soldier example. Now for Zarya, I use a small circle. Some players prefer a crosshair, but I would honestly never recommend the default because the way it works is when you get more charge on the default crosshair, your circle starts thickening and thickening. There's too much going on in that crosshair, and when you're at full energy, it just covers way too much of the screen. So I would suggest switching to something a little bit smaller. And finally for Zenyatta, I like this crosshair for him personally. I use the circle and crosshair, with the crosshair being very tiny. The circle represents how big his orb will be when I shoot it from a distance, and the small little lines help me level out the shots on the horizontal and vertical planes. Now once again, these crosshairs are what work for me. You can obviously customize them to your own liking, but I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm KarQ with the Predator Training Room. Until next time.